Sounds like Europe. Cross-border podcasting.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Sounds Like Europe, Cross-Border Podcasting, a project brought to you by WePod. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Javi Caminero and I will be your host on this beautiful and exciting journey we are starting today. I am 25 and I work as a podcast producer at Prisa Audio, so I will be talking to you every episode from Madrid. Our office here in Madrid is located on Gran Via, which is one of the most visited and busiest streets in Spain. In fact, as I talk to you right now, I can see Gran Via. And why am I telling you this? Well, I'm originally from Puerto Llano, which is a small town towards the south of Spain. And whenever I came to Madrid as a child, I'd say to my parents and my sister, "Hey, do you see that building? That's the radio station. And one day I'm going to work there." There is the place where I'm talking to you now from, and it's the place where I've been working now for more than 3 years. So being your host in this project means a lot to me. I have fond memories of how the radio was always on at home, while my parents were cooking, while they were cleaning, or even when there was nothing to do, there was always a voice in the back. It was just part of our lives. To be honest, I don't think they did it with the aim of being well informed. They were just used to having the radio on, and that lit a spark in me. That's why I wanted to be a journalist when I grew up. I think I'm on the right track, but I'm still trying. And being a part of this project makes it a lot more exciting. Okay, so now the introduction is out of the way. What is WePod? WePod is a European project funded by the Creative Europe program of the European Union. It is an audio journalism project involving 9 partners from 6 different countries. The aim of the project is to produce 24 podcasts, but also to empower independent podcasters, create a hub for the industry, and organize training and communication events across Europe. Sounds Like Europe is another step towards these goals. In this podcast, I will be talking to journalists, sound designers, editors from the European podcast industry. I will ask them all the questions I need to know the answers to in order to better understand the industry. Nevertheless, podcasting is still a very unknown medium. I bet you, as a passionate listener, have so many questions about it. Of course, in Sounds Like Europe, I will take you behind the scenes of this huge challenge, and I will let you see how we are dealing with all the obstacles, and I hope with all the successes we find along the way. Let's go, vamos allá. In this first episode, I want to answer a very important question. How do you start a cross-border podcast? Now, 4 months into the project, 2 co-productions are already underway. The process is both a little overwhelming and very satisfying. To explain how you manage to coordinate a cross-border podcast collaboration, I'm going to talk to someone. Alexander Damiano Ricci, Chief Operating Officer and founding member of Bulle Media, our Belgian partner in this project. Ciao Alex, ¿cómo estáis?
Hey Javi, thanks for having me. I'm good, thanks.
Thank you. You live in Italy, Alex, now working at a Belgian company. You have also worked in France. I think you are a cross-border project on your own, but tell us, what's your story?
Yeah, well, so my journalistic career started in 2013 when I moved to Paris to work as an Italian editor at the pan-European newsroom Café Bulle. And that was already kind of a cross-border experience itself because we had in the same newsroom 6 different linguistic versions, so 6 different editors, and each editor was responsible to edit his own version or her own version, of course. But then we had cross-translations between different articles. So that was already a kind of cross-border experience itself, and it really kind of framed my mindset, I guess. Then I moved back to Italy to work on a research project in political science, but always on the sides of communications. And meanwhile, I was continuing to do reportage across Europe.
You became an expert in these cross-border projects, like even without knowing it, you know?
Well, yeah, kind of. It was, I was from the outset. I mean, my first working experience was inside something like that, a cross-border newsroom already. So it really framed my mind, as I told you. And I think everything started in Paris back in 2013. Then I did freelancing as a regular journalist for Italian media companies, but I always was kind of drawn back to these international experiences somehow, and which led me also eventually then to join Bulle Media, where we co-wrote with Prisa the WePod project, which is pretty much cross-border, I guess.
And here in WePod, you are acting as a coordinator for all the productions, and that's quite some work. How are you dealing with all of this?
Well, it takes a lot of communications with all the partners, of course. So in WePod, we have a big number of companies from different European countries. We coordinate through Slack every day and week. To Milanote as well. Milanote, which is a software to organize creative projects and processes. Obviously, there's an astonishing number of meetings and calls between different partners. But yeah, every co-production then has its own way of proceeding, right? So but in the essence, that's it, I guess.
And even though every co-production, as you say, has its own essence, what would you say a cross-border production of this kind must have? What's a cross-border podcast?
Well, to me, the essential ingredient is that two persons or two teams from different countries collaborate, right? So who's doing the podcast itself makes it really much a cross-border operation. That is to say that, if two Italian or two Spaniards would work together and cover something happening in another country, I wouldn't define that truly cross-border. So to me, it becomes cross-border when you have two different perspectives who try to work together with all the national characteristics, but that's what makes a project really cross-border, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think a story needs to have, on this note you're telling me, to be compelling to both the audiences of the partners involved and to Europe as a whole?
Well, obviously, there's two ways to tackle this, in my opinion. Either you have a really strong story which articulates across borders, so which is relevant for two countries, and it can be a really specific story even, which, relates always to feelings and notions which are interesting, I say, for humans in general, meaning that, narrative projects articulating around the story have some essential ingredients which are interesting for anyone. Or if you don't have that specific story, you would obviously start from a general topic and then try to find a story within that topic. So I think these are two different approaches. And then for the European audience as a whole, well, I'm tempted to say that if it's relevant for two different countries, it starts being relevant also for a European audience in general, although that's not always the case.
Here in WePod, the projects we are producing are documentaries. This is important for the audience to know. And what are the different stages of the production process in podcasts like this? So you can explain us.
Yeah, maybe I will refer to WePod also, for this question. We have divided the production process in different stages. I think there is a pre-editorial stage where we brainstorm, although someone could call it already an editorial stage, which then becomes slowly a pre-production phase, meaning that we start to, beyond the topic, reflect more concretely about, the characters of each podcast. How do the different episodes talk to each other? Probably, tentatively, because we have not been on the ground at that stage. And then we have the production phase, which to me means pretty much going on the ground, setting up interviews, working on the scripts, so the transcriptions in between. And then we have the post-production phase, which is when everything which is textual becomes eventually, so the scripts become eventually a finalized podcast. We could also add promotion to that in the end, but this depends a bit on how you see things, I guess.
And then as well, people have to take into account that every podcast will be done in two languages of the partners involved and also in English.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out. In WePod, every co-production between different podcast companies will be post-produced into the relative national language of each partner, plus into English, as to have an international version. Obviously, this creates specific challenges because not all versions can be identical. You need to make room for adaptations. So that's a really important part of WePod, I'd say.
As I said on the introduction of this episode, there are 9 partners participating in WePod. Each one has their cultural background, their way of working. What's the key to make such big productions work?
Well, my experience told me over the years that you need people express themselves. If you come with a top-down approach and telling it's all about setting up a process, a method only, it will never work. I think it takes time just to sit around the table, understand each other. So, and I have understood this over the years, honestly. At the beginning, in these European projects, you have deadlines, deliverables, and you're pretty much kind of freaking out to meet every deliverable you have to meet, every deadline. But truly, if you apply this top-down approach only, I'm not saying it doesn't need to be in part, but if you apply this approach only, things get more difficult. So I think it just takes a lot of talking before action.
Back in September, Alex, when we had the kickoff meetings here in Madrid, I remember you asked everyone in one of those meetings about our motivations and our fears in WePod. Now, nearly 4 months into this project, what about yours?
Well, I mean, I think that, we all have been, I know probably who's listening to us, to this interview, has been active in podcasting. So I guess the fears are the usual ones, that things can go wrong production-wise, that something, some stories will not work eventually. But I think it's part of the game. So I wouldn't say that I have a specific fear other than, anyone else in this project, just because I'm the coordinator. But yeah, overall, I mean, it's a challenge, right, to produce so many podcasts over such a short period of time. So I don't have a specific fear, I guess, but how to say? Probably if I have to point out one thing, I'd really love that all podcasts speak to every audience we aim to target. And it's not really a fear, but I think it's the biggest challenge to make sure that every podcast finds its audience in every national context.
I believe that not having many fears in this context is quite a motivation on its own. So
absolutely, yeah.
That's my take there. You are the first guest here on Sounds Like Europe, Alex, and I would also like you to be here when we record the last episode. That will be nearly in 2 years, towards the end of 2025. So let's do something. Send a message for yourself in 2025, and as I said, in almost 2 years, when we get to the end of this project, we will listen to it together on the last episode of Sounds Like Europe.
Well, I think I would do or ask myself 2 things. One is, what would you have done differently in 2 years from now? And secondarily, I think I would be interested to know from myself in 2025 how what's happened politically in this continent has impacted our work, maybe. Because I think, as journalists, we work always between the lines, covering a reality, but obviously politics impacts reality and vice versa. So I'd be interested in knowing how what has been going on in the continent has affected our work.
There are 3 more questions, Alex. I will ask every guest that I talk to in Sounds Like Europe. So let's see. Right now, what's the most important podcast in your country?
Well, it's difficult to say what's the most important podcast in our country. I can tell you one podcast which is really listened to, at least on Spotify, which is Stories from Cecilia, Sala, which is produced by Cora Media, which is one of the partners of WePod, which is surely one of the most listened podcasts. It's a daily where the journalist Cecilia Sala brings stories from across the world. And then there are, many other podcasts which I think are beautifully done. But if you ask me which one is the most important one right now, I don't know if important is the right definition. I don't know if it's important, but it's surely one of the most listened to.
Okay, that kind of makes it, I think.
Thanks.
When's your favorite moment, Alex, to listen to podcasts? Because there are I used to listen to podcasts when I'm working out on the gym, or maybe when I'm cleaning my house. What was your moment?
Well, you guessed one of the 2 moments. One is when I clean up my house, my apartment, the flat. And the other one is when I drive in my car for, say, a long distance. Long distance meaning when it's longer than an hour.
And just out of curiosity and to close this interview, what's something that makes you stop everything and go listen to a podcast?
I'm particularly interested in journalistic podcasts which have a narrative dimension. So whenever I see an inquiry, an investigation in the form of podcast, that's really something that intrigues me. So, for instance, one of the last ones I listened to, I had to absolutely, was it's called Ostsee, which is a podcast by Die Zeit and Süddeutsche Zeitung from Germany, and it's an investigation into the bombing of the Nord Stream within the sea. And whenever there's something journalistic in the form of podcasting, which is narrative, serial, I really stop and say, I have to listen to that.
Okay, I think working with you now in one of our co-productions, I think I'm starting to get why you are so much into narrative podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Alexander Damiano Ricci, coordinator of the WePod project and COO of Bulle Media, thanks a lot for your time and for being here on the first episode of Sounds Like Europe.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Javi.
Thank you. And to everyone on the other side, I've been your host, Javi Caminero. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll do it again in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Sounds Like Europe. Cross-Border Podcasting is a WePod podcast funded by the Creative Europe programme. Hosted and written by Javi Caminero. Sound design by Manu Tomillo. Coordinator Alexander Damiano Ricci. Executive producer Anna Ribera.